Hey, welcome back to another episode of Addicted to Gear. Today, before me, I have my pedal board. And the reason why I have my pedal board propped up like this is because we're going to be talking about pedal tips and tricks version 2. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because quite a few months ago, I made a video where I discussed some basic tips and tricks regarding pedal boards. And I got overwhelming feedback to that video and so many questions that I thought it would be well worth making another video, a version 2, and going over more details to try and answer some of the questions that the viewers had. I realized after the fact that there's still a lot of mystery shrouding, pedal boards, and people tend to overthink it and make it more complicated than it actually is. So we're going to try to demystify some of the questions and clarify some of the rules. There's not many rules. There's a few rules when it comes to using your pedal board with an amplifier that has an effects loop in it. But beyond that, you can really be free to experiment with the pedals as you like. And I highly encourage that because it really takes a lot of experimentation to find the sound that you're looking for, that you're hearing in your head. It took me many years of trial and error with different pedals. And at the beginning, I was swapping pedals in and out quite a bit. As a matter of fact, my pedal board was morphing on a day-to-day basis practically. Until I kind of understood the foundations of the tone that I was looking for. And since that point, I've swapped out a few pedals here and there, but overall, the actual foundation of my pedal board has largely remained the same with the elements that I'm using here. So you'll notice that between this video and my last video, the pedals have changed, and they still do change depending on the requirements that I need for some songs that I'm playing with the jam band, or maybe when I'm experimenting with any new pedals. So take that with a grain of salt. This is not a video in which I expect you guys to copy exactly what I have here. That's not the goal. The goal is really to find your own tone. What I'm trying to aim for in this video is just to give you a bit more information as to how to use your pedals in such a way where you're not destroying your tone, but augmenting it. And that's one of the major errors that a lot of new players make when they actually start investing in pedals and don't really understand how to use them. I find that they overdo everything, which actually makes their tone sound a lot worse than better. So there's a lot of ground to cover here, and I'm going into this video with the expectation that you kind of understand what the pedals that I'm showing you here today do. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about every pedal on my board, but I'm going to more or less focus on how I'm using the pedal overall to give you a better understanding of that. So without further ado, let's jump into it. This is probably going to end up being a pretty long video, so I want to warn you guys right up front that if you're expecting a short video this time around, this is not going to be it. But if you're looking for a bit more information and some usable tips, then stick with me to the end of the video, and I think you guys will find it worthwhile. So let's get started. Okay, so hopefully you guys can have a proper view of my pedal board here. I propped it up for you so you can see what's going on. So I want to start off this segment by saying that there really is no right or wrong pedal or combination of pedals. It's really what you're looking for in terms of a tone. There are a lot of examples out there on the internet as to what your favorite player is using as his or her favorite pedal in conjunction with other pedals, or even the chain of pedals that they're using. So you can definitely use that as a guide to developing your tone or establishing the direction of building your tone. And you can use that as a foundation. But if you experiment with your own pedals, you'll probably find a tone that's geared better to what you're looking for. And obviously, there's a lot of variation when it comes to pedals. There's probably 101 different types of tube screamer clones, or delay pedal, or reverb pedal, and so on and so forth. So everyone is slightly different. when you're building a pedal board, it's like making a recipe for a cake. Every element within the board will change the outcome or the final result of your cake. And the pedals are working exactly the same way. Each pedal in here will throw a curveball in terms of how the EQ will work in conjunction with your amp and your guitar. So a little tweak here and there can make a huge difference. Now, it's important when you're trying to establish your board to get the foundations of your tones down first. So what I like to suggest people do is they listen to how they're playing and, you know, try and write down what you're looking for in terms of a sound. Now, if you're looking for a heavier sound, a lot of people will gravitate immediately to distortion pedals or overdrive pedals that color the sound quite a bit. They're easy to use, they're plentiful, and you know, that's generally what most of the guitarists out there will buy first. Is it the most flexible pedal? Not really. Is it the pedal that will augment your tone the most? Well, you'll definitely hear a larger, drastic change in tone, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll make your tone better. I'm of the idea that it's better to build up your pedal sounds gradually or in layers. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that in a minute. But just keep that in mind, where the goal of this pedal building video is to try and be subtle with your effects, not to overkill everything and overly saturate your sound to the point of no return. That's a very huge part of getting good tone. If you saturate your sound right out of the gate, then there's really no turning back or any place to go from there, and you lose all of the nuances of your playing. So as opposed to drowning your sound in syrup, you know, maybe you just want to lightly sprinkle some sugar on it to make it better, to make the actual cake that you're building better than it actually is, just with the core tones of your guitar and amplifier. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to have your amplifier and guitar tones come out through the sounds that you're producing in your chain of effects, and be the core tone, and then have the pedals work with that tone to bring it up a notch and make everything sound better. So a little goes a long way, guys, and that's very important. So let's look at what we have going on here. Just so you understand the layout of my pedal board, I'll show you exactly what the sequence is here. So I'm going into my tuner pedal first, then going into the compressor pedal, the Brown Sound in a Box 2, which is a distortion type pedal, overdrive, this is a vintage Joyo overdrive next, then the booster pedal, the EQ pedal, and then these three pedals on this side of my board are part of the modulation effects that I have going. Generally, most of the time, these are going into the effects loop of my amplifier. So I have a delay, a reverb pedal, and a looper pedal. So my board is basically divided into two sections. Everything from the tuner pedal all the way to the EQ pedal here goes in front of my amplifier, and the rest of the pedals on this side of my board go into the effects loop. Now, a lot of people don't understand effects loops and are probably not even using their effects loop on their amplifier, which I think is a big mistake. If your amplifier is equipped with an effects loop, you should indeed use it as much as you can, because it allows you to keep your modulation effects pristine, and they won't be affected by the tonality of your amplifier. So you can actually keep them pure and separated. So if you have a send return input and output at the back of your amplifier, that means your amplifier is equipped with an effects loop. By all means, you should definitely be using that as much as possible. As for the other effects here that are not necessarily modulation effects, they can go into the front of the amplifier, and they will definitely work different in an amplifier that does not have an effects loop. You'll notice that, for example, my Blues Junior doesn't have an effects loop, and when I put these pedals into the front of the amplifier, the modulation effects will work very different than they will in an amplifier that does have an effects loop. If I go into my Fender Supersonic 22, put these into my effects loop, they will sound different. So you have to keep that in mind. You can't necessarily write down the settings and keep them that way and use different amplifiers and expect to get the same results, because each amplifier will take effects differently. Okay, that being said, let's look at the components of my pedal board here. One of the main components, the most important component, is this guy right here, which is the power supply. This is the heart of my board. I say that because without the power supply, I wouldn't be getting any power to any of these pedals. And it's worthwhile to invest in a good quality power supply. I learned that the hard way when I actually used a Joyo Chinese-made power supply that I paid about $50 or $60 at the time. And I quickly learned the shortcomings of that unit, because it basically failed to provide enough power to my pedals. And what was happening is that the pedals were actually being starved of power, and the unit would actually turn on and off. And I would see the lights on the pedals going on and off because it couldn't furnish the required voltage for my pedals. Shortly after that, the wall plug on that unit broke, and I had a really hard time finding a replacement for it. So I decided then and there to get rid of that and invest in something better. And I used this Decibel 11 Hot Stone Deluxe power supply, which is really, I'd say, a huge upgrade compared to what the Joyo was. This unit is well built, extremely well built. You can throw this at somebody and you'll definitely knock them on their ass. It's that heavy, and it provides more than enough power for all of my pedals. So much so that if I take the power plug off of this unit when I'm using it, all of the pedals will actually stay on for a good 4 to 5 seconds after I pull the plug. That means that the unit is actually furnishing a lot more juice than is necessary, and will be able to provide power even if you have a spike in your power, or a surge or a brownout where you're losing power momentarily. You won't see anything or hear anything while you're using the pedals, because it could supply a lot of juice. This unit will only be able to power 8 pedals. That's the maximum that it can power up. You can buy units that can power up more or less depending on how much you want to spend. And you'll notice that I have more than 8 pedals on my board. So that's not really magic or wizardry. How do I do that? Well, I'm lucky enough to own the Polytune 3, and the Polytune 3 has a little hidden feature in it where it can actually use the output on it to power up an additional pedal. So I'm using the output on this pedal to power up an additional pedal on my board, which will bring the total to 9 pedals. This, by the way, is a very good quality tuner pedal. I highly recommend this pedal to everyone. I did a review on this recently, so you can check out that video for full details. But just so you know, this pedal is really 2 pedals in one. It allows me to power up another unit, so I don't have to have an additional power supply. It allows me to use this pedal as a buffer pedal, and we'll get to that in a minute, and I'll explain how important having a buffer pedal on your board is. And it's an excellent tuner with lots of flexibility in it. So check it out. I had a previous version of this pedal on my board earlier, and I upgraded to this one because I like it so much. So the buffer section in the Polytune allows me to recuperate a lot of the lost high end that results from using long leads and a lot of cabling. For those of you who don't know how a buffer works, I'll explain it very briefly. A buffer allows you, once you have your pedal board set up, you normally go to your pedal board with a lead from your guitar. That lead could be 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, whatever you have available. Then the signal goes through all your pedals, and in between every pedal you have a shorter lead. Then finally, at the output of your pedal board, you have a lead that's going to your amplifier, and that also could be another 20 feet, 15 feet, what have you. All of that cabling results in a loss of high end, and you really notice that at a certain point when you take your guitar and plug it directly into your amplifier. When you plug it directly into your amplifier, you're going straight in, you have a lot less of that loss of high end because you're eliminating a lot more of that, cabling. I noticed it primarily when I was using my Brunetti Pleximan. And what ended up happening was I was plugging directly into my amplifier and I had just wonderful sizzle, a lot of top end, especially in the overdrive channel, the clean sound, very chimey. And then I would go into my pedal board and it would be very different. Everything would be sounded kind of dull and rounded. And I didn't understand why that was happening. I assumed that it was one of my pedals in my chain that was just sucking tone, because there's been a lot said about, pedals that are not true bypass sucking tone, which is true, but I tried to eliminate each and every one of my pedals independently to try and nail down which one was the culprit. And lo and behold, I discovered that it wasn't the case. It was actually the fact that I was using my pedal board without a buffer. So when the Polytune 3 came out, I was really happy because I could actually use one pedal and use it as a tuner and a buffer. So having the buffer built into the tuner allows me to recuperate a lot of that high end that I would otherwise lose. So having a buffer on your board, I would say, is highly important, especially if you're going beyond 3 or 4 pedals and using long leads of lesser quality, because that's when you're going to get the most tone suck. So if that's your situation, put a buffer on your board, put it in the first position, and you'll definitely see a huge improvement in your fundamental core tone. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that's what we want to try and maintain and avoid any kind of deterioration of that core tone. So that's step one. Obviously, a tuner is very important also because you want to stay in tune no matter how impressive your licks are. If they're not in tune, you're not going to impress anyone. So a tuner is a must as well as a buffer, in my opinion. Now, let's look at the rest of the pedals on the board. There are some pedals in this chain that do a lot less, or I shouldn't say do a lot less, but are a lot less obvious as to what they do as opposed to others. I think everybody understands what a delay pedal does or what a reverb pedal will do, as well as a distortion or overdrive pedal. When it comes to compression here, this is my second pedal in my chain. A lot of people don't necessarily have a compression pedal on their board. I would say that the majority of people don't actually understand what compression pedal actually does. And I'll be quite honest with you, until recently, I didn't have a compression pedal on my board either. But after introducing a compression pedal, I realized what it actually brings to the sound. And although it's very subtle, it's definitely an improvement. I'll explain to you how I use it. Basically, the compression pedal on my board allows me to dial in a little bit of compression, which actually levels out my sound. When you're strumming a chord, for example, or alternate picking a chord, you'll notice that just in general, the notes don't ring out evenly. There are going to be some notes that sound a little bit louder than others. And that's, physics and string sizes and pickup, the way your pickups are picking up the tone from your strings and so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff happening there. But let's suffice it to say that the compression pedal will allow you to even things out and take the highest sounds and the lowest sounds and kind of bring them closer together, kind of squish everything down so that it's a little bit more even. Now, the compressor pedal also will allow you to augment the sustain that you're getting out of your notes. And that's also very handy because who doesn't want to have more sustain? It's a wonderful thing. So it's the type of pedal where you don't necessarily think you need it if it's not on your board, but after using it and taking it off your board, you're going to miss it. So I generally keep this on my board now at all times. This is not a super expensive pedal, it's a budget pedal, but it works well and it does what I need it to do. So a compression pedal for me is a definite must on the board. I want to say a couple of words about the quality of the pedals here. You'll notice that the variety of pedals that I have here are not all boutique pedals by any means. I have some more expensive pedals and some less expensive pedals. Obviously, you can see the Joyo here. I have quite a few Joyo pedals on my board, the Donner pedal as well, the do-it-yourself one, and some TC Electronic stuff here that I really like. Now, I'm not saying that these are the only pedals that you should buy, and I'm by no means a cork sniffer when it comes to pedals. I'll use whatever sounds good, whatever's within my budget, and I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money. If I can get a similar sound with a less expensive pedal, I'll do that. I have no problems with that. Of course, there's quality issues that might arise, and if a pedal doesn't stand the test of time, obviously I won't buy it again. But so far, so good. What I have here has lasted me quite a while, and I'm sticking with it for now. It works for me. All right, so let's move on. So after the compression pedal, this is the meat and potato section of my board. These three pedals right here. So the distortion pedal, the overdrive pedal, and the boost pedal. And why do I say that's the meat and potato section? Well, because to me these three pedals will work like gears. This to me would be first gear, second gear, third gear, or overdrive. Okay, and this is a section of my pedal board that actually has the most dramatic effect on my tone. And in my opinion, you have to be pretty careful how you use these boost and overdrive and distortion pedals if you're using them the way I am. I'm using these in layers. I basically don't use them necessarily all at the same time, but I could use the boost in conjunction with one of these if I need the additional push. Let's start with the boost pedal. The boost pedal here, I'm using the boost pedal not to actually give me more volume, but just to color the tone. The EP booster is known for its Echoplex kind of circuit, which allows a certain degree of coloration to the sound. If I turn up the knob, obviously it's going to get louder. So you can use this as a solo boost or something like that. But most of the time I keep the volume completely off and I just use this to color the sound. The EP booster is a great pedal if you want to make everything just sound bigger, fuller, punchier. It kind of pushes the signal to the front of your amplifier and just boosts it a little bit. It doesn't, kill your sound or push it to the point where it's saturated, but it just makes everything sound so much better. So 90% of the time, this pedal is actually on when it's on my board. I leave it on all the time practically, and it just makes everything sound better. Then I go into my overdrive when I need a little bit more. So if I could get the natural saturation or the overdrive from my amplifier just by pushing it with this pedal, that would be like stage one. Stage two would be when I need a little bit more and I want to get a little bit more grit, I'd use the overdrive pedal. And then when I really want to get full saturation, I would go into my distortion pedal and I could get as heavy as I want. I can basically take over from where this one leaves off and really get as heavy as I want to be. So this here is kind of really the core sound that works in conjunction with all three pedals when I'm looking to push the amplifier and get a little bit more overdrive or distortion. The warning I can give you on these pedals here is just keep it under control. Beginners will always overdo the distortion and the overdrive. They just get trigger happy with them and just put everything up to 10 and leave it that way, and that's their sound. I find that if you do that, you lose a lot of the nuances of your picking. The chords become muffled and everything kind of just blends together, and you just lose the dynamics of your sound. So I try to keep it, when I think it's right, I dial it back a little bit, just so I have a little bit more headroom that I can play with my guitar volume and my amplifier before it actually hits these pedals. And I think that's the right way of doing it. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with overdrive pedals, distortion pedals, anything that really colors your sound a lot. So next in my chain here is my 6-band EQ, and this is basically a copy of an MXR EQ. It's just less expensive. I use my EQ as insurance. Why do I say that? Because an EQ pedal will allow you to tailor the frequencies that are coming out of your pedal board and your guitar. And in certain situations, when you're playing with a band and the volume is quite loud, what ends up happening is that people step on each other's frequencies. So, one guitarist will be struggling to be heard over another guitarist, or the guitarist will be struggling to be heard over the bass player and the drums. And a mistake that people make is just turning everything up louder. And all that does is basically start the domino effect, where the guitarists go louder, then the bass player goes louder, then the drummer hits harder, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, everything's out of control. A better approach would be to put an EQ pedal on your board. This way, when you're playing in a situation with others, you don't have to necessarily turn up the volume. You just have to dial in the right frequencies that will allow you to stand out in the mix without necessarily having to compete with others. And this has saved the day numerous times, especially when I'm playing in a situation where I'm not using my amplifier. I might be forced to use whatever amplifier is in the studio, and it allows me to either pump up the mids or boost the lows, or just give a little bit more sizzle with the high end, and allow me to stand out amongst the others without much effort. So this is the type of thing where if you're playing alone in your room, you might not need an EQ pedal. But if you're playing with others, it definitely will make your life easier. Highly recommended. All right, so now we're getting to the modulation side of things here, and it's actually not very complicated. The modulation side of my board here is just really two pedals, the delay and the reverb. Now, my delay pedal is used very, very subtly, almost like all the other pedals on my board. I don't overdo it unless I'm playing some U2 songs where the delay is the primary tone in the Edge's sound. But for me, I like to use the delay as a filler, just to make my guitar sound a little bit bigger. The way I do that is I dial in almost like a doubling effect. I keep the delay down and I use it as a slapback delay. So I don't necessarily use a long delay time. It's a pretty short delay time. I dial it down in the mix to maybe about 30%, and I keep the feedback also pretty low. So this way, you almost have to struggle to hear it, but it's there, and it just makes everything sound a little bit bigger. In conjunction with my reverb pedal, the two sounds work together. The reverb pedal is normally on pretty low as well. I don't like a big cavernous reverb because it just makes everything messy. But I use the reverb pedal either in spring reverb mode when I'm trying to simulate some kind of a Fender amplifier, if the amplifier I have in the studio doesn't have a built-in reverb, or I'll use it as some kind of a plate reverb. And the plate reverb is really just there to bring back some of that shimmer that I like to have in the studio when I'm playing. It just makes the sound a little bit more sparkly, in my opinion. The great thing about the TC Electronic gear is that they do have the opportunity, they give you the opportunity to have one slot available for what they call a tone print. And that means you can actually go on their website, find the sound that you like for a reverb, download it from your phone directly into the pedal, and then store it into that last slot there as a tone print. So it's a very flexible unit. I like the stuff that TC Electronic is putting out very much. I think they're coming out with some really good quality stuff. That's why I have 3 of their pedals on my board. So overall, guys, that kind of gives you an idea of how I'm using my pedal board. And if you want me to actually play through the board for you guys so you can actually hear it in action, I'll be more than happy to do that for you. All you got to do is just comment that you want me to play the thing, and if I get enough requests, I'll definitely do that, and it'll give you a better idea of how the sound works in conjunction with the amplifier and guitar to build up the tones as I go, so that it's, you know, basically clean guitar into amplifier, level 1, level 2, level 3, and then the rest of the pedals just add a little shimmer on top of it all. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. I might not have covered everything that you wanted to know, just because there's so much to talk about and it's easy to get sidetracked when you're dealing with so much information. But overall, guys, that's kind of the foundation that I wanted to set forth here for you guys, so that you could understand my approach to the pedal board. When you're building a pedal board, it will take a lot of time to do it correctly. Yes, some people just slap together a couple of pedals and hope for the best, but they generally don't have the best tone. If you're careful and take the time to experiment with an individual pedal before introducing it into your pedal chain, and then putting in the right location so that it works well with other pedals, it definitely takes a lot more effort. You have to listen to what your pedal board and your playing sounds like before and after the fact. But once you have the correct recipe, it's a beautiful thing. I actually started using pedals when I started to play guitar, but I really didn't understand what I was doing. And a lot of pedals came and went over the years. As a matter of fact, at one point, I totally shunned pedals altogether and decided to buy myself a Boss multi-effects unit. And then later on, I decided to buy a Pod multi-effects unit, and I thought that would be the right way to go. But it never actually gave me the tones that I wanted in a live situation. They worked fine in, you know, my studio here when I was playing by myself, but I could never actually dial in the correct tone when I was in a live situation. So I returned back to pedals, and I'm glad I did. And I really think pedals are the way to go today, even though there's a lot of great tools and software. And again, those might be correct for your needs if you're playing by yourself. But in a live situation, I think there's a reason why people are still using pedals today, because they actually do a great job. If you have the budget and you want to go into something as fancy as an Axe Effects, by all means, those are great units as well. But generally, a lot of people claim that they just don't have the same feel as a real amplifier. So I kind of like to keep it pure and stick with pedals. So that's it for today, guys. I think I babbled on long enough. I hope you have stuck with me through the length of this video. I know it's a little bit of a long one, but hopefully you came out of it with a better understanding, at least as to how I approach the pedal board and how I use it. And again, this doesn't mean you have to copy me. If you want to copy what I'm doing there, fantastic, but there's 1,000,001 different ways to approach tone, and this is just one way. So if you have any other questions regarding pedals, pedal boards, how to use them in conjunction with one another that I haven't actually covered here, please just send me a comment. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Again, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you tuning in regularly to my channel. You guys are the reason why I keep making these videos. If you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that. If you don't like it, just give me a thumbs down. And if you're new to my channel, welcome aboard, and please subscribe, because there's more great stuff coming your way and you're going to miss it all if you don't subscribe. In the meantime, guys, stay tuned and keep rocking.